Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm excited to have another good friend on the line with me here today, Mr. Phil Lyons. But before we get going, I'd really love to share a little bit of the illustrious career Phil had. He started as a sports journalist in 1973, moved on to the BBC and spent a certain amount of time at ITV, where I believe we actually ended up doing some work together for the first time. A big part of his career was spent with the Premier League as director of international broadcast, and he then had a sting with CAA Sports as well as Lagardère until he settled in now with his own consultancy company called Notka. So welcome to the podcast, Phil.
Well, there's a lot of people, Marcus, who have congratulated me about my stroke of marketing genius to introduce the midday Premier League match here in the UK, saying, wow, wasn't that a clever thing to do because it's prime time in Asia and that really helped you. Right? Yeah, exactly. And actually, as much as I'd love to claim it as marketing genius, it really wasn't. It was down to a police decision in the UK. Really? At that time, they were a little concerned that people were going to be going to big matches a little bit worse for wear with alcohol. And so they wanted to introduce an early kickoff, and any matches where they were worried about this, they could put into this early kickoff slot. Now, the great thing for me was that all the matches they were worried about were, the big local derbies.
Of course.
Yeah, like Manchester United, Liverpool, Spurs, Arsenal, etc. Yeah. So those were the kind of matches that were being shifted to the early kickoff on Saturday, which, of course, was going out at prime time in Asia. So, that really did help. But as much as I'd love to claim that as genius, it wasn't anything like that at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never read that, I have to admit. But that's great. That's a great story.
I think there's a whole bunch of different reasons. People are always asking me, what's the reason for the success of Premier League internationally? And I say, hey, it's not one thing. I mean, setting up Premier League TV with IMG to make sure that all of the output was consistently good and, properly badged, I think that was important. I think it'll happen. I think as, some sports get to a point where they're not getting money from pay TV, they'll launch their own OTT channel. But there's going to be someone who comes along and aggregates that. Someone's going to come along and say to them, hey, why do you want to mess with all of that stuff? I can do all that for you, and you can just slot your content in here. You want to have a channel for your sport? Here it is. It's on my platform. I'm doing all the marketing for this platform. I'm doing all the revenue collection, production, technical. Correct. You just got to. So it'll come round to that again, and I don't think that's going to change.
And I agree. And we literally having exactly the same conversations here in Asia with leagues who are now saying, broadcasters are not lining up anymore. And, Asian leagues are always having a tougher time than, let's say, the Premier League had in the past anyway. And therefore, we have to go on our own. We have to create a direct-to-consumer business. And, there are obviously companies who build OTT platforms. Now you got plenty of them around the world. And we're just going to hire one and we're going to do it. And as you rightly said, that's as a concept makes sense. There is a lot of logic to it. The execution, as usual, is a lot harder to do. And this is sort of some of the work we're doing right now as well. But it's fun. But I do believe, and I think you sort of almost said that in the same way, it will take a few years. It will shake itself out again, and there will be a new model, and there will be new revenue. Will it be really tremendously larger than it is right now, or does it have to go through a slump before it can turn again?
You can't do it without competition. I mean, the bottom line is you've got to have competition in markets for your rights. Otherwise, forget about it. You're not going to get increases. Yeah. But if you have got a competitive market, and really, if you've got more than two, if you get upwards from three, then you can play some very interesting games. And
totally agree.
I remember we had situations where broadcasters could bid for regions, or they could bid for individual territories, and they would put in bids for both, end up bidding against themselves and making the price go up. It was for a salesperson, it was a joy at that time, I have to say.
Yeah, yep, I do remember some of those conversations we had, and it's a great segue into the next part really of our conversation. That is, the world now has obviously dramatically changed. I would argue the glory days of what we're talking about, and how these fees just continually grow, and you literally could see every year there was a nice additional increase, or year on year packages, depends on how it was sold. I think that world has gone. I believe it's the opposite is happening, is that rights fees are either stagnant, and in some cases we've obviously know already they're going backwards. Although in some sense you would think that shouldn't be the case, because new technology has come in with OTT, new players have come in. But I think in some degree these new players have really destructed, or created a destruction in the rights fees, because it takes so much revenue away from the existing parties who have been feeding this, right? The pay TV operators, and maybe in some markets still there was always free to air. There was some good money there as well, but really pay TV who drove a lot of these massive rights fees we've just been talking about. But now you got a whole different, world out there,
I don't see how there's a massive increase in the revenue pool. If anything, I think that's probably shrinking, because we live in a time where younger people particularly only want to pay for what they want to watch. They don't want to pay monthly subscriptions, annual subscriptions, and they don't care about the rest of the stuff that's on the channel. They just want to pay for what they want to watch. Yeah. The trick of the pay TV broadcasters or the OTT guys is to give them what they want, so that they're paying just what they want to watch, and then they're going to find out that they're actually paying more. That would be that's what
it is. It's much more fragmented for sure. I think it's the unbundling is what I always call it world, really, where it is no longer about buying this big pay TV box and put it in your house and you have 200 channels where you watch 5 of them only anyway. It is really about those 3 or 4 or 5 channels I want, and sports hopefully is always a big part of that. People are still willing to pay for it. I think that there's plenty of research out there where that's proven.
The question, of course, I think people would pay for it.
Correct.
But Marcus, how much and how often and on what basis, and whether we're talking micropayments, which I think is quite interesting, and what will happen? Someone will aggregate. I mean, I've talked, what I do now through my agency. I still work with governing bodies. I still try and do for them and help them in the way I help the Premier League. I think you just have to, and I know it was the same for you. You do one thing and it leads to another. Absolutely. And you get some that work and some that don't. I've been very lucky. That's the thing you need more than anything else. You need luck. Yeah. I was very lucky that Richard Scudamore decided that I could do something for the Premier League, and I did it. I think you got to have faith in your ability to transform things, to change things. Most of the time I've succeeded in, but as you mentioned, there've been some there where I haven't been able to do it.
So talk a bit about what do you see in your career, whether some of the agencies or certain roles you had, maybe where it didn't work so well.
Well, I left the Premier League to join CAA, huge American agency, and they had some very ambitious plans to dominate the world, to rival IMG. But essentially it didn't work out because when it came to it, the guys who wanted to do it were too used to the way that they worked in America. I mean, that's one big lesson for all of us, that America is very different. Its sports model is very different. Its broadcasting model is different. There's a lot of stuff that comes over from America, but when Americans try to do things outside America, they're usually a little bit surprised at how big the world is and how different it is to America. For as long as I've been doing this, people have been talking new technology, because new technology is sexy and there's a lot that I love about it. Yeah. But actually what I always say to people is, where's the new business model? It's great having new, ever more sophisticated delivery mechanisms. You can do this and you can do that. But actually the business model doesn't change. You're either going to get someone to pay you for watching, or you're going to get people, commercial companies to pay you for eyeballs. It's either going to be advertiser funded or subscription.
Correct.
And no one has yet come up with something which changes that. So, it used to be when everything was about portals and the internet. Now it's about OTT, but actually it's the same, pretty much the same revenue pool you're dipping into. So suddenly if you get it does make me laugh when I see reports about how the sports rights is going to grow and grow and grow massively. And you're thinking, well, and they're saying it's because of OTT. And I go, yeah, well, but it's Peter robbing Paul. If someone launches an OTT channel with a great sports property on it, that's fantastic. And whoever gets those rights, and if they get their numbers right and the balance of what they pay for the rights and their number of subscribers, they'll make a lot of money. But that money is coming from the subscribers who will not now be spending it with a paid TV company. So, yeah, I don't see how there's a massive increase in the revenue pool. If anything, I think that's probably shrinking because we live in a time where younger people particularly only want to pay for what they want to watch. I think that the day of the big agency is probably over. I think, let's put it this way, I wouldn't launch or try to be involved in a big agency now. There's been times over the last 5 years where people have come up to me and said, hey, why don't we start a big agency? I can get the backing for it. I don't think that's the way to go now. I think that the major properties are very good at selling themselves. I mean, the trend that I started when I went to the Premier League of doing deals directly with broadcasters, well, Premier League has done that ever since. A lot of the other governing bodies have done that. They've cut out the middleman. They've cut out the agency. So it's a very limited world that they're operating in, and the crown jewels don't need them. If you add to that a falling rights market, then it's a pretty tough time to be a major agency. I think what will come out of it, and we've seen, In Front recently had a very disappointing IPO on the New York Exchange. IMG pulled its flotation on the eve of its going to market because they were worried about what was going to happen. We've seen MP and Silver. That's gone.
Absolutely.
I don't think that we're going to see big comebacks or new agencies emerging. I think what will happen is you will see more what you might call boutique operations, maybe bigger than mine. I mean, I like to work as a one-man band. I sometimes join up with other people who provide things that I don't do, like market research. But I like to work as a one-man band. One can have philosophical debates about what Asia is and what is the commonality between the countries that make up Asia. Yeah. But in football terms, when you think that, the football version of Asia embraces Australia, Korea, the Middle East, and the Central Asian countries as well, and everything in between. You think, well, the dichotomies, the differences between those different territories in economic wealth, in football ability, in stadia size, in broadcasting sophistication. I mean, there's some territories within there that don't even have any laws relating to intellectual property. Yep. So that makes it, you can try and copy a European model, but actually it's very different and it's very big. And that, I think, that doubles the challenge, probably.
I totally agree. Phil, I'd love to thank you for this great chat. It's always been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll see you soon again somewhere, whether Sportel or another part of the world. And thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure, as always, to chat with you, Marcus, and I hope that I've been able to give anyone listening a little bit of insight and help. Thanks again.
Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited.